Hey everyone, it's me, Fola Olakumbi. So I'm kind of just doing this three things really. First thing is I'm doing this because I like doing these chats and I like talking to you guys one on one or one on uh, three. Um, and also because we've been away for a while and yeah, I kind of guess I should, I don't need to explain, but basically I moved, so we haven't really had time to do the podcast, so that's been a bit of a pain. But we're back now, so we should be semi-regular. And also just one thing, seeing as I'm here, in this podcast we talk about this thing called Object R, and we go through lots of different things, and I think it's really good. Like we don't know what we're talking about, and we're all over the place with it, but I think the core idea is we're kind of right on that. One thing that did come up, and to Helen's credit, she always does this. She'll sort of drop something in, and I'll sort of gloss over it, and then I'll go away and think about it, and be like, "Man, that was really smart what she said." She mentions the fact that Don, through this episode, doesn't really do anything, and she was asking at the beginning of the episode, why he doesn't pick up, like why he doesn't get the car, like what is it about what they well the way I interpret it was like what is it about the episode, what is the episode trying to say by Don not getting the car? And it's kind of obvious that he doesn't feel like he's earned it, but they show us he doesn't feel like he's earned it because he doesn't do anything and he knows that in his mind, and I think that kind of plays into the episode. But we talk about all that kind of stuff and more. So sit back and relax and enjoy the next episode of the Old Fashioned Breakdown. Take it away, David Cabanara.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Old Fashioned Breakdown podcast, a rewatch podcast for the valuable TV show Mad Men.
My name is Fola Olakumbi, and I've seen the show a couple of times and look at it mainly from a subtextual point of view.
I actually just read that as a sexual point of view. I was like, that's really weird. I'm Helen and Fola, and this is pretty much my first watch through, so it's all new to me.
In this episode, the Gold Violin, Don continues to better himself, but he's confronted with the cost of his progression. Sal indulges his fantasies of an impossible life through Ken's work of fiction, and Jane upsets the natural order of Joan and proves that age before beauty, pearls before swine. I didn't write this one, by the way.
You can tell I've just added a little bit of flair
There's
to
a bit
it.
of flair there.
Normally, if it was Fola, it would have been something like, Don buys a new car, Sal has dinner with his fake wife, and Jane gets a new pair of shoes. That's probably what you would have written, something like that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Alright, well, let's begin. What
Okay.
did you think of the Gold Violin?
So, Gold Violin. So, first of all, the first thing I want to say about this episode is this is like I started watching the show pretty much from the start as soon as it was on TV, right? But this is the first episode where I was like, "Ooh, there's something going on. I don't know what it is."
What?
And it's amazing. Genuinely, this is the first episode where I kind of paid attention to it, and the whole thing with the picture just kind of hit me. I was like, "Oh, there's something more going on behind."
Do you mean on the first time you watched
Yeah,
this?
the first time I
Okay,
watched it,
fine.
yeah.
I was like, are you like deconstruct every episode? Like, how is this the first time that you realised?
No, the first time I watched it, the first time I was
Okay,
into it, I was like,
fine.
wow, this is really interesting. But I never really looked at it deeper than that. Even the second time I watched it, I never really sort of thought about it. I just kind of thought, that's deep. I don't know what it means.
So this is like the Gold Violin moment for you.
Yes, it is. It
Nice.
is like the Gold Violin.
I like that.
So yeah, I really, really like it. What do you want me to say? Do you want me to go into like what I thought about the episode? Or?
I guess so. Yeah. Let's generic thoughts.
Okay, so generic thoughts. Like I said, I love the episode. It's probably my favorite episode of all of them.
What, the whole thing?
Yeah, of the whole thing. Just because
No
of the
way.
sentimental value of it all.
Even better than Indian Summer.
Even better than Indian Summer, yeah. Because I think this is the show. I think this is what the show is, basically. I think this touches on all those things that we talked about before, like, you know, object art and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and pleasure versus enjoyment and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's all in this episode. And I think it does it in a really kind of, there's definitely really sort of Lacanian things in there, but they're so deep that I can't even get into them myself. There's one where I'm kind of like, I don't even know if I should talk about this because it sounds too weird. But yeah, I love this episode. I think it's fantastic. I think it's about objects.
Okay.
What did you think?
I enjoyed this episode.
Yeah.
I did like all the different storylines. I had a particular favourite with Jane and Joan, the ultimate showdown.
That was good, yeah.
I thought it was really good and really interesting.
Right.
I think it again, it's another episode for me where I felt it was pretty much what it said on the tin.
Right.
And I also think with this one, there are a number of like unanswered questions. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that every episode needs to tie up each storyline with a nice little bow.
Yeah.
But I do think there's quite a few things which I will talk about when we come to them.
Okay.
Where I just feel like, why was that started but not finished?
Okay.
Kind of thing.
Interesting.
But overall, you know, I think it was a solid episode, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I think, yeah, some of the cinematography and like editorial decisions were really good in terms of like backing up, I think, what you're going to say in a far more intellectual way than I am going to say.
I don't know about that. I just want to, before we go on, I'm going to list out all the things that I think this episode's about.
Oh, jeez.
And then we just get it out of the way if anyone's just kind of like trying to get the crib notes. So I think this episode is about objects, fantasy, youth, disposability, object R versus the object of desire. That's a big one. Enjoyment versus pleasure. Outsiders and insiders. Excess. Work and putting in effort. And there's definitely a theme of like people getting things wrong. People get a lot of things wrong in here, and they're really subtle. Oh yeah, and the synecdoches in the. Do you know what a synecdoche is?
No.
A synecdoche is like a small part of something that makes up that you name that essentially is the whole of the thing. So it's really hard to describe, but like something like.
So like a tree is a trunk, leaves, branches.
No. So it's more kind of. A black tie. There. That's what I was looking for. I knew there was a word. A black tie. So like a black tie. Wear your best black tie outfit. That's basically a suit. And because you're only talking the synecdoche is the tie. So stuff like that. So there's a lot of synecdoches in here.
Fine. Okay.
And validation. That's a good one. And I also need to revisit that whole idea of Lacan saying women don't exist.
Well, guys, if you have a spare 4 hours, we will still be here as we go through Fola's tremendous list of things that happen in this episode.
Yeah.
Shall we get started on
get started.
the episode breakdown?
Yes.
So I think the first storyline we are going to discuss today is Don.
Okay, Don. Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote, Don continues to better himself, in quotation marks, but is confronted with the cost of his progression, also in quotation marks. What do you think of my analysis?
So you think I don't understand. So you're saying he's trying to better himself.
What I mean by that is it's a bit like, it's that whole conversation that's, you know, the Sterling and Cooper conversation with Don, where it's that whole thing where they're like, right, you've got to look the part now. You've got to have the car.
Yep.
You've got to be at the balls. You're a I can never say that word. Philanthropist.
Yeah.
You're all these things. You've got to start acting the part and, you know, not taking shit and doing, you know, that's kind of... Excuse me, that was awful. Just coughed all over the microphone. And what I mean by that is I think there is always been a little bit of Don where he sort of doesn't believe that he deserves that.
Yep.
So when I say he continues to try and better himself, what I mean is by bettering himself to be at the level that Sterling and Cooper are as individuals.
Do you mean sort of like accept his reward?
Status? To better himself. The same way that you'd be like, oh, I want to be... No one says, oh, I want to be like an office worker at a company. They're like, I want to be the CEO.
Yeah.
This is Don, in my opinion, like going... Right, actually, I do deserve these things and I am going to behave in this way. I am going to drop a whole load of money on a car I don't need.
Yeah.
And this is... And I think what I mean next when I say he's confronted with the cost of progression is that he doesn't realise the price that he's paid for the price that he pays for those things and the actual impact of them. Because I think, yes, there's already a part of him, that's why I said he continues to do it, because I think there is a part of him that already believes that he's entitled in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's never seen himself as being almost equal to...
Yeah, so just one question. When you say the cost, like, what do you mean? Like, what do you say? What do you think?
Well, the cost is he has to confront himself with the idea, which I think he has started to in previous episodes, that he's an absolute asshole. And I think, with this, it's becoming more and more clear to him, because previously, I think he's looked in the mirror and seen himself as an asshole. But I think in this episode, it's the first time anyone else has confronted him and said, "You're an asshole."
Oh, that's good. That's a very good point. That's a very good. In fact, he's literally looking in the mirror just before someone says it to him.
Absolutely.
So I think the whole episode, like I said, I think it's about objects and stuff. And objects are kind of quite an important thing as far as Lacan's concerned. He has this thing called the object R, which I think we've spoken about before.
Yeah.
Which is kind of hard to describe. But then there's also another object, which is the object of desire. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of... And they're two kind of things that kind of work... Well, they kind of work against each other and with each other. So the object of desire, there's a lot of those in this episode. Loads and loads and loads of them. One of them is the car, obviously.
Yeah.
Then we've got like keys, we've got Ken's story, we've got Jane, we've got Don, we've got like tuxedos, checks, all these kind of things. They're all like objects of desire. They're all things that people can kind of look towards to obtaining and sort of grasping in their hands or whatever.
Yeah. And
through that, because you sort of like fix this thing in your mind, or this thing this thing as the object of desire, in obtaining that thing, you have to live life. You have to go through certain things to get it, and the things that you go through, the actual interactions, the relationships you make, all that kind of stuff. That's what object R is. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
So all the way through this episode, you've got loads of situations where somebody is trying to do something, or someone's trying to obtain something, or sort of understand something, or see something. Like, Don's worked his entire life. Don's life is basically object art. So that the whole point, that whole speech that Cooper gives to Don, there's loads of things going on in that speech, but one of the things is he's talking about how Don's kind of done all this work and how he's kind of like worked his way up to this point. And he's talking about the object. That's his life. That's what he's done to get there. And the thing that he's obtained is access to this world, sort of into this kind of this private world where you do philanthropy and you sort of you're creating the rules, and you can drive the fastest cars and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of, that's a small part of it. There's other things in there in that scene that are really cool. Like that's where the first time I noticed him talk about the what's it called, the synecdoche, because I said like a synecdoche is like a suit, a black tie. Well, another synecdoche would be Sterling Cooper, because Sterling Cooper are the people that own the building, but Sterling Cooper are people within the building, but they're also the company itself, if that makes sense. So there's stuff like that, and that comes up later on as well in another storyline, but I'll talk about that later. Sorry.
So should we start? Should we start with the car scenes then?
Yeah, let's start.
Let's start with the car scenes. I liked it. Nice opener. Nice little opener. Having a look at a car.
Yeah.
My main question with the car scenes.
I
mean, there's some nice lines in there where he's, at the beginning where he's with the car showman.
Yeah.
My main question with the car scenes was the flashback.
Yeah.
Because the flashback I thought was really weird. Because first of all, it's sort of like I get why it happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
I get why they'd put that flashback in there because the guy has just said something to him that sounds really fake. And what does he say? Have you written it down anywhere?
I can't remember what it said.
It says something like, "Oh, this you'd be driving this car and this I don't know. I can't remember what it is, but it's like something like it's really cheesy, typical car salesman line."
Okay.
And then he goes into his flashback, and then it's that whole thing of obviously it's one of the real Drapers checking in to see who is pretending to be Don Draper.
Yeah.
And then they never finish it. And then you're just a bit like, and then you see the car scene again later on when he goes to get the car and he's already sat in the car and he's like, "I'll take it. I don't even need to test drive it. I'll take it." And then I'm like, that's a perfect time to finish that little knot.
Okay.
And they don't.
I think that's because I don't think the point of that scene was to tell you anything. It was just there to give you a sense of how Don feels about himself. And I think the whole point of that scene is, we're talking about this idea of it's also one of the things I didn't write down. This thing of the phallus.
I know the phallus.
Right. And the thing about the phallus is it's this kind of, it's an object of desire in itself, right? But it's hidden behind this veil. And you're not, as a person, as people, we don't want to. We know it's there, and we know we can grab it if we want. But
I mean, really, you shouldn't.
We have to get through this
without permission.
We know it's there. We know you can grab it if you want, but you don't want to because, in your mind, it's not going to. Deep down, it's not going to change anything, and that's the whole thing about this object of desire. The object of desire isn't that special. It's almost like it's a symbol of making it, but it doesn't actually mean anything. It's a status symbol, yeah. It's a status symbol. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't have any value of itself. The only value it has is the value that you give to it. So Don not wanting to take this car, you see him flash back to his kind of old life where he was kind of selling things to people, and this woman reminding him that he's not who he says he is. And it's kind of like a massive jolting thing. I'm like, and he doesn't feel like he deserves it. He doesn't feel like he's done the work for it. And then it takes, well...
I mean, I don't know. Like, how qualified do you have to be a second-hand car dealer or whatever? Like, I don't know. But that's what I mean. That's why it's weird. Like, because he's trying to convince this kid in the flashback to buy this car. And he's got his like dodgy little suit on, young John Hamm, lovely, And it's like this woman comes in. It's this huge dramatic moment where she's like, "You're not Don Draper."
Yep. Can I just say there's something that no one's gonna understand, but there's a almost like an algebraic sort of mathematic equation, right? And the mathematic equation is, and I do have a screenshot of this, but there's a mathematic equation that Lacan made, and it basically says barred subject, diamond shaped A, right? And it's basically fantasy, and it's kind of how fantasy works. I can't really explain it, but there's a shot that shows this exact kind of like thing, and it's like, when you see Don sitting at the window,
yeah,
and he looks out of the window and he sees this woman turn up. Well, there's a barred S on the window, and then there's like a diamond shape in between it, and then this woman standing there, and I know what that woman's name is.
Oh, okay. Is she in it later? Is she?
Maybe I can't
Okay.
I can't say.
I mean, knowing you, it's probably Betty or Peggy. So
But yeah, it's just really clever. But that's for anyone who knows who Lacan is, who's listening. But yeah, I just think that first opening scene is just really, really interesting. Just seeing Don not being able to pick up the car. Some of the things that the guy says to him are kind of interesting as well, because it's like, it's almost like this guy. You know, I was watching the DVD, and Matthew Weiner says he wanted that guy, the salesman, to be like almost like a Mephisto type character that's just kind of appeared out of nowhere and is kind of like offering him these things, but Don doesn't want to take them. Yeah, it's really cool.
So why do you think he doesn't take them? Because he doesn't feel
worthy.
He doesn't feel worthy of it.
No, he doesn't feel worthy at all. He doesn't feel like anybody. He's not the person he says he is. That's why it flashes back to him, to this lady telling him, "You're not Don Draper," and he's kind of like, he looks at the car and he's like, I can't take this car. I don't deserve it. I'm not who I say I am. That's what I think anyway.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like I say, I think that for me, that flashback was just kind of weird. But I get it. I get what you're saying, and I get that that's the principle of the... I mean, I didn't know whether it was because he had money or a family, or like, I don't know what it was. I just kind of got the impression... I mean, if it was me, I'd be like... it's quite expensive. But obviously he doesn't say that because he's Don Draper. So,
No.
you know, but I think the fact that he's there, because he's only clearly gone there as well because Roger has sent him. Like, that's the only reason he's even there in the first place.
Yeah.
Is that Roger's gone to tell him to
not,
go and get your car sorted out.
It's not just Roger. It's not just Roger's name. It's the card that comes with it. It's like he says, this is my card from work, something like that, and then the guy sees it and says, "Oh, you know Roger Sterling? Well, let me get the keys." So it's only when he produces this object, this worthless object.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
That he does something, and also one of the interesting things when you go to the flashback, the thing that Don is trying to convince the son to buy the car, but instead of convincing the son, he talks to the father.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like this whole thing of object R. So if you the way to think about this object R, object of desire thing, is to think of a long road and an ice cream at the end of the road, right? So the ice cream at the end of the road is the object of desire, and the road is object R. So that's kind of how. So like the father, he's talking to the father to kind of like get, but the dad says to him like, "I'm not the one you should be talking to. It should be him." So that's kind of cool. We could talk more about the lady as well, but let's just leave that for now.
Let's leave that for now. Let's move on to Don with Roger and Cooper in the office.
What about before that, when Don is in his office by him? Is it when Don's in the office with Duck?
I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. Like, I just think that was just, you know.
I know. There's just things that Roger says about Jane in there, and that.
Oh, what when? Cool. Yeah, okay. I mean, I mean, I'd say the Jane stuff comes later when we talk about Jane.
All right, let's talk about that later. All right, cool. Let's talk about the let's talk about the Cooper and Don and Roger part.
So, the number one thing I want to say about this scene is I literally, at one point, had no idea what they were actually saying to him. I was like, are they going to make him a partner?
Yeah.
Like, because they were sort of going, "Oh, it's time for you to do all these things," and blah, blah, blah. But there was no, like... It was just really... It was a really weird conversation. It was like, they brought you into the office. They're both, like, sitting there. And they're like, "Oh, we've got some stuff we want to talk to you about." And they'd obviously sent him in and not Duck, so he's special.
Yeah.
And then they're just going, "And we want you to do all these things and, like, be a philanthropist and blah, blah. Do you understand what we're saying?" And Don's just kind of like... I think Don was a bit like me, because he was just a bit like, "Don't really understand where this conversation's going."
Yeah. What I like about that scene is, you said that Duck kind of gets left behind.
Yeah.
And as Don's walking out of the office, he kind of taps him on the shoulder and sort of just walks out sort of nonchalantly.
Yeah, why the hell did he tell him to leave? Like, he didn't even say anything that was... I don't understand. Like, oh my God.
Well, there's two things. So, like, I think that whole thing with Duck, in that part of that scene, Duck, and he does it in the earlier scene as well, Duck's kind of talking about how much work he's done and how he's kind of like landed this big thing for him, and like how he's, basically created all this business for him. And then obviously they're not interested in Duck, they just want to speak to Don. And then Don goes into this room and it's all about all the work that he's done and like all this stuff but what's really interesting is as he leaves, he taps Duck on the shoulder. And when he's in the room and Cooper asks Roger to leave, Roger taps Don on the shoulder.
But that's what I thought you were talking about. I thought you were talking about that scene. Like when Roger hang on. Cooper asks Roger to leave, right?
Yeah.
And then Roger leaves, and then he doesn't say anything that's like... do you know what I mean? It's just like, why did that whole thing happen? Like, I don't understand.
I think it happened because it's all about... it from when Don leaves Duck in the office, it's like for Don, it's like this big thing of like, you've been selected, you're special kind of thing. But when Cooper tells Roger to leave the office, it's almost like Don is just the normal person. Do you know what I mean? He's like, he's not as high as Roger is, or he's not the status of Roger still. It's still the same thing. He's still, even though he's been sort of given this sort of pat on the back sort of thing, he's still just Don. Nothing's really changed apart from symbolically.
But again, something has changed. But I think, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm a dense audience member, I don't know. But when I watched it, I was just sort of like, but really, nothing does change. Because they don't say anything other than you need to do this and you're going to be this and like blah, blah, blah. It's like when you sit in front of a child and you're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, you want to be a vet? Oh, okay. Well, we'll make that, we'll make sure that happens and like blah, 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 and like false promises and all that sort of thing. But actually, in fact, they don't even give him a false promise. Like, they just say stuff about how great his life's going to be, and then that's it. There's no like, there's no like, we're doing this for this reason, or it's like they've selected him because he did well in that coffee thing, and then all of a sudden he's been invited to some sort of weird exclusive club which has no name.
Well, do you know the museum that they're talking about is an actual museum in New York, right?
Yeah.
And it's called the Museum of American Folk Arts, and it's a museum basically that was made up of... It's basically some guy just said, I want to make a museum of folk art. He didn't know what folk art was. He didn't have any money. He didn't have any kind of place to put anything. All he had was this idea to make this thing. So I think it ties into the theme of the episode. So if you think about objects, an object doesn't have to be a physical thing. It can just be a thing in your mind. It can just be an idea.
Well, then there you go. That's what that is. But to me, it was a really kind of weird... It's like, imagine your boss inviting you into the office and being just like, and, I'm going to expect you to go to more parties now. And it's like, what?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
It just... And I feel like Don doesn't even quite... I think you can see his sort of like little cogs going in his head, bless him. And like, I think it's interesting that everything that happens to Don in this episode is because someone else has asked him or told him to do it.
Oh, you think?
Yeah, like he only goes to the party because Betty wants to go to the party. He only buys the car because Roger wants to buy him a car. Like, everything that happens is really because other people make him do those things.
That's true. I hadn't thought about that. One interesting thing about this scene is there's a line that Cooper says, and it's a big sort of powerful line, like philanthropy is the gateway to power, right? And what's really interesting about that line is, that museum?
Yeah.
the first object they ever had as their big item or their big sort of like showcase was a gate in the shape of the American flag.
Oh.
So that's basically philanthropy being the gateway to power. And that's the gateway to power in America.
There you go.
It felt really clever when I realized it, and now it doesn't.
Well, no, I mean, I don't really understand. I still don't understand that scene. I was sort of like, what's happening? I like very clear instructions. So.
Yeah, you're not going to get that with the show.
No, you're really not. Should we move on to the Don and Betty picnic?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, do you want me to go?
You go first this time.
So there's loads of stuff happens in this. I was just looking at this morning actually, but I think the main thing of the whole scene is the fact that Don's got this new car, and anyone who talks about the show will always talk about this scene about I can't believe people used to do that back in the day where they just throw their stuff around. I think another theme in the episode is the idea, we talk about objects and we talk about the object of desire. The weird thing about when you obtain the object of desire is it's pretty much useless. Like we were saying, it can be a card, it can be anything, and when you get it and you realize it's not worth anything.
So it's a gold violin.
It's a gold violin, exactly. It's not worth anything. So there's a lot of stuff in this episode about disposability and how things are just kind of thrown away. And that's kind of what's happening here. It's like there's also this thing about them having a picnic. While they're actually having the picnic, one of the things that keeps coming up is the fact that they seem to love it there, and I think Don says we should do this all the time and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's to me, that's kind of like the idea of enjoyment and how the difference between enjoyment and pleasure. And enjoyment is this thing where you can enjoy something that is really difficult. You can enjoy something that's like a pain to do, as long as you just enjoy the actual fact of it. So when some people kind of enjoy jobs where they're stressed all the time and they kind of have to work on their feet and have to think really fast. Some people like that kind of stuff. I like this kind of doing this podcast where I kind of stay up for ages just watching every single line and try. It's an absolute pain to do, but I love doing it. And those are the reasons why we kind of live. So you might have a relationship with someone where they're a pain in the ass, but you keep fighting and it's exciting and you kind of love each other because of that kind of thing, and that's kind of like an enjoyment thing as well. And then there's a whole thing that versus pleasure, and pleasure can be really sort of instantaneous and sort of not last very long. So it's
like an orgasm.
Yeah, exactly, like an orgasm, or like something really sweet that kind of is there for a second and disappears, or like a drag on a cigarette, or like a glass of wine or whatever. Just something that's kind of very temporary, but it levels you out for a bit and it gets you away from the stress. But it doesn't further your life. It doesn't help you to grow.
Yes.
And that's the difference between the two things. And I think that's kind of what they were talking about when Don says we should do this more. But really, these guys are always they're always working at something. They're always stressing themselves out. They're always doing things they don't enjoy. They're always trying to get and that's another thing. So you can sort of tie it into the whole idea of the object of desire and object R, where object R is enjoyment in itself. Like the road, the actual the journey is enjoyment. And the pleasurable part is the bit at the end where it's just this thing that you kind of go, oh, that's nice. And then you forget about it. Because really what we're living for is the journey and sort of doing things every single day and doing something new and sort of challenging ourselves. And the death and the resurrection of kind of our own psyches. Anyway.
Jesus. Anyone else need a drink now?
Anyway, that's what I thought of that scene.
Wow. How do you top that? I thought the scene was good. To me, this was that whole thing of it just looking like one thing, but really being another thing, in the sense that you see them, they're all lovely, it's all nice, conventional gingham,
Yeah.
picnic blanket, sunny day, you know, like she's lounging on his chest, the little kids playing checkers.
Yeah.
And then it's just like interruption after interruption. Little boy needs to pee.
Oh, yeah.
Then the girl's like, she wants to pee, or like blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, go on.
I was going to, well, I don't want to take you off your track, but I'll let you finish and then I'll talk about Sally wanting to pee.
About the peeing.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the peeing?
Yeah.
Okay. But then it's that whole thing of it's like, it's lovely, it's beautiful. And they're like, oh, yeah, we should just do this. So Betty says, it was like, oh, we should do this more often. And he says, oh, we should do it all the time.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And then that thought's interrupted because it's like, oh, we want to beat the traffic. So it's like it's so amazing, but he still can't. He's still thinking about the traffic.
Definitely.
So then they get up. He lobs his can off into the distance. I mean, the most shocking thing is bloody Betty, though, isn't it? When she gets up and she just shakes all the rubbish off the. I mean, honestly, of the whole thing, that made me so unhappy.
People
I was like, it's so beautiful, and she just literally like leaves all her crap all over and then they all bundle into the car and go home.
But that's it, isn't it? That's the whole thing of it's just this. They are enjoying themselves. They're having a good time, and everything that they get from that enjoyment, at the end of the enjoyment, they just throw it away. Like
But it's almost like, to me, this is almost like Don Draper in a scene.
Right.
So it's like you've got the gold violin bit where it's all brilliant, everything's lovely and perfect.
Yeah.
But then what's left behind is all the trash, all the shit, all the totally. The stuff nobody wants is still left there. And that's the thing, is you can't escape that.
Yeah, totally. The thing I wanted to say about Sally wanting to pee. So basically, Bobby says he wants to go to pee-pee, right?
Right.
And then Sally says, Don tells him to go against a tree. And Sally says she wants to tinkle outside. And Betty says it's different for boys, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I should go into this. But anyway, so we're talking about Freud here. We're talking about Lacan.
Okay, here we go.
And this is basically, to me, this scene is about penis envy.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. Hit me with the penis envy.
I don't know too much about it. Basically, the idea is that,
women are jealous because men have penises.
Much,
I'm so jealous. I wish my genitals hung outside my body.
This is all subconscious, and it kind of goes to that whole thing of, again, the phallus, isn't it? Like the idea being that Sally wants the phallus. Anyway, let's move on. Look it up if you want to know any more, because I'm not going to go into it anymore.
So, right. And then we move on to Don confronted with uncomfortable accusations. A perfect segue into penis envy. No. So this is obviously the bit very towards the end of the episode, but they go to this party. Yep. What's his name? Jimmy has rung up Betty and gone, Betty, giving her a little bit of a flirt, which we know Betty always falls for hook, line and sinker.
Totally, yeah.
Come to my party, love. Come to my party. So she gets Don in his black tie, and off they go to this party. I'm just trying to find the bit where Betty's talking to Jimmy on the phone. That whole scene where Jimmy phones up and he wants to talk to Betty. It's kind of, there's just kind of it's a really short scene, but I think we see more of this whole sort of objects of desire kind of, and object sort of thing. So this whole thing of like, he wants her to come to this party. He's kind of like inviting her to this party, and he wants her to be there. She's the object of desire. And the way to get her to do that is to actually, like you say, flatter her and tell her all these nice things. And it's kind of like the two things work in tandem with each other. I didn't really want to say much more than that. I kind of... What did you have anything that you kind of... No, not especially. I mean, he rings her up, he flirts with her, he convinces her to come to his party. At that point, did I think there was an ulterior motive? No.
Okay.
I thought he was just being a bit Jimmy, you know.
He calls her the Hudson River Valley Belle or something. And do you know what the Hudson River is?
Yeah, it's a river in New York.
Yeah, but I think it's like the second place that was discovered in America.
Oh.
and the reason I think that's interesting is because Christopher Columbus obviously discovered America, but this guy, what's his name, John Cabot, was also looking for something that Christopher Columbus had discovered, but he didn't know what it was. So he came across the Hudson Valley River, and that's how North America was kind of discovered. It's just kind of, I like the fact that kind of is in there as a kind of another kind of one of these things of object art and the objects of desire.
I mean, in this, Betty's basically a golden violin.
She is.
I mean,
yeah,
she's like,
definitely.
she's pretty, but she's useless. Like, she's just, you know, she sort of loves a bit of flirting. She gets on a posh frock, off they go to the party.
Yes,
right?
let's talk about the party.
And, you know, that's that whole thing of Jimmy. We find out Jimmy clearly invited her there so he could... Plan A was get into her pants.
Well, this is the thing. Well, I don't... Do you think that? Do you think that's...
Well, this is the thing. So this is the big question for me about this whole scene, because it's really... I don't know is the short answer.
Okay.
Because one wonders if he had the opportunity...
Yeah.
Had she not turned him down...
Mm-hmm.
Would he have?
Well, I guess that's the point. Is it like, what is his real motive here? And I think the reason I wanted to go back to that phone call is because when they're talking, Jimmy says, I know exactly what I'm doing. And it's, to me, it's kind of, I don't think it matters what he actually wants to do. I think the point, what he specifically wants to do, whether it's kind of like just tell her that Don's cheated on her with his wife, or, you know, sleep with her or whatever. I don't think that matters. I think what matters is the fact he wants to fuck things up for Don. And he wants to do that because he's got what he wanted. He's got his object of desire, which is his TV show, and his life's great, and he's kind of... he
says that.
Yeah.
But he's clearly not happy.
I don't know if he isn't happy though. I think I just think he wants to ruin his life. I don't think it's got anything to do with whether he's happy or not. And I don't think, this is the point, I don't think getting the object of desire is anything to do with happiness. It's not. Getting that object doesn't make you happy. Getting the golden violin doesn't make you happy. It's just something to... But it's object R that makes you happy. It's actually doing the thing that you... And when we say happy, when I talk about happiness as in like content and sort of joyful, I'm talking more sort of enjoyment, where it's just kind of, it's just something you like doing. It doesn't necessarily mean it makes you smile. It might make you miserable as hell, but it's something that you enjoy doing, and it's something that you fill your time with, that you keep going back to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there's more. I think it's very deep. I think his character is way more complex than, because I mean, the first time we met him, he was yelling at like a curvaceous woman.
Yeah.
You know, who just so happened to be like actually pretty important.
Yeah.
And I think for him, he does want to fuck things up for Don.
Yeah.
But one would also ask, if he didn't care, then why would he bother? Like, he's got what he wanted. Because
that's... So, I don't think that's all he wanted. I think... Yeah, but at the same time, I think...
And my second point would be, why is he still with Bobby?
That's a good point, actually.
And I think the reason is that it is as I've just said, Betty is a gold violin. I think he's a gold violin as well.
Okay.
I think he is Bobby's gold violin.
Nice. Interesting.
In that she sees him as something perfect. She sees him as her business. She sees him as a way for her to get enjoyment out of her life by
An
fucking
object.
around. Yeah, he is her object. He is her object.
Yeah,
He is her performing monkey.
Okay, yeah.
And he loves her, and that's the difference.
Right, okay.
And that's why this bothers him so much, because one would even ask, does he do this because he loves doing it? Because we haven't seen him go on and on about this show for it. It's her that's been pushing for this show. It's not him.
Right, yeah, that's a good point.
And I think there's a whole really interesting dynamic where he's like, yeah, I've got what I wanted. And he's happy with that because it makes his wife happy.
Right. But he doesn't, that doesn't give him anything.
Exactly.
He's just kind of gone along with it.
Exactly. It's complicated.
Okay.
And, you could argue, because we don't know enough about it, and that's one of my things with this scene, was that whole question of, did he want to sleep with Betty? Was that his plan A? Because that would have then made her, or put Don almost in his shoes.
Yeah.
But when Betty doesn't do that, that pisses him off, because he's like, well...
He goes to plan B. Just burn it down.
Do you know what I mean? And I think the other thing that bothered me a little bit about the scene, and it's not a criticism, because I realise, as I said at the beginning, you can't untie every single knot.
Yeah.
But what I was interested in is how he found out.
Oh yeah.
Which is never explained.
That's a good point.
Because obviously back in those days you couldn't just look at her DMs.
Well,
or
okay, so there is the scene in The New Girl where he wants to see Don, and he literally he phones up to see Don after the whole crash and everything, and everyone's panicking, thinking, oh no, he knows, and then he just says, oh, you're a really cool guy. And it's kind of like, does he know then?
Well, this is the thing, but it's never confirmed.
Yeah.
And the other question that raises is this something Bobby does habitually?
Yeah, well.
Is this why he is the person that he is?
Well, he does say she does.
but you know what I mean? But that's the thing, is it's like, well, if he knows that...
Yeah. Why does he stay with her?
Well, no, why does he stay with her? But also, why does he seem to go for Don so much? Because he's aware that his wife is actually a factor in this. It's not like... Because actually, she pursued him.
Well, hang on. You got to remember, a big part of this episode is enjoyment, right? Jouissance, let's say. Oh, and also, you got to remember that scene, and also the very, very final scene. They all refer back to Red in the Face.
Oh God, we can go back with the referrals now.
Well, Red in the Face is the episode where Don...
Yes, I know. I remember that one particularly.
And they're kind of fighting each other, and the whole point of... That's the thing about human psyche, where people compete with each other, and Don and Jimmy is kind of competing with Don, and there is, that whole episode ends with Don having made Roger sick, and then walks off. And I know you didn't see it because you don't like watching people sick, but he walks off and he's got this massive smile on his face, and that's kind of what Jimmy does at the end of this episode. He kind of just fucks up his life and enjoys the moment of kind of fucking up Don's life.
No, absolutely. Well, I wouldn't even say that he... I don't even know if he really did enjoy it. I think the powerful part of this episode was the look on Don's face is the same from when the woman in the shop who comes into the car dealership is like, you're not really Don Draper, are you? Or whatever she says. And he's got that look of horror. Yeah. And he has the same look of horror.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, in both of those situations, he cannot deny...
This is true.
He tries to deny, or at least we see him try to deny in the Jimmy scenario.
Yeah.
But he can't deny it, and I think for the first time it's almost like that confrontation of actually he knows in his head he's not this person, all blah blah, and he has other people who will convince him, oh, you are great and you are a philanthropist and you are all these things, and this is the first person who's basically said you're a massive shitbag and I hate you. And he's just like, oh my God, I can't believe that. And it's that look of horror is just, I think it's fabulous. Yeah, really. And I really enjoyed that scene, and I really, little phallic high five to Jimmy for going there at his own party and going for the guy that,
Before we move on, can I just say that, I was talking about how red and blue are kind of important colours in the show.
Okay, yeah, she's wearing blue. Who's wearing red?
Bobby's wearing red.
Is he? Okay.
Well, she. girl Bobby.
Bobby, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Shall we go back then?
Should we go back?
Yeah.
Should we do storyline B?
Storyline B, yes.
Let's go storyline B. So I put storyline B is Sal indulging his fantasies of an impossible life through Ken's work of fiction.
Yes. So how are we gonna do this? Because like I think a big part of that is them going in to see this picture. The picture is.
I actually.
Or would you say that's not? Would you say that's something
I
else?
think that's so. I actually think that's sort of like a Jane thing.
Oh, okay. All right, fair enough.
But
Fair
I think it can tie into both.
No, I think you're right. Let's leave that for Jane because I mean, do love that picture.
For this storyline, I don't think there's a whole lot really to say. I mean, from my perspective, but we know what you're like. I mean, so it's very obvious. It's sort of like Ken's approach to life.
Yeah.
Is different to Don's approach to life, isn't it, really?
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, the defining line for me in this is everyone's telling him, oh, you're a brilliant writer. And, you know, Sal's proper giving him the whole, like, brown nose thing, blah, blah, blah. And he's just like, oh, it's just my hobby. And then Sal's like, a hobby? Like, you know, because this is, I guess, your pleasure enjoyment thing, isn't it? Whereas it's like he does it. I think Ken does it for pleasure. I don't think he does it for enjoyment.
Really? Okay.
In some senses, because I think he...
But that, would you say, okay, it's probably not a one-to-one thing, but what would you say he does for enjoyment? Would you say that was his job? Because I
don't know. I don't think he enjoys his job, but I think I think he sees his job as a job, which is not what most people in that place see it as.
Right, okay.
I think he sees his job as a job, and I think he sees his writing as a hobby.
Okay.
And I think he's got a very clear distinction of like, this is what I do to earn money, and this is what I do for pleasure.
Yeah, okay. But I'm just trying to see how that fits in. So like, if he does, because I would say that he does enjoy writing. I think...
Yes, he does enjoy writing.
And like specifically enjoys it. And I would say that he does, but for pleasure, he does things like, you know, chat up women and, you know...
Yeah, but he's shit at chatting at women.
You know, he just turns up and says his name. But it's like he smokes, he drinks, all of those things. But his real enjoyment is, his hobby.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
I think because from what you said about enjoyment is it's also the thing that will drive you to succeed in life.
No, that's not what I meant. What I meant in terms of it drive you to no. So that's different. So I know there's a lot of jargon. Sorry. The thing that drives you to succeed or drives you to better yourself, so to speak, is the object of desire. So that's the kind that, and that doesn't necessarily, so that the object of desire isn't necessarily, it's not going to make you work in a good way or a bad way. It's just going to make you work. So you could strive towards the object of desire by enjoying yourself, which is like, you know, like doing this podcast, or like with Ken with his writing, like he's just kind of like, he's just doing it because he enjoys it. Then he might get something out of it, but he might not. But it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that he's doing this thing that he enjoys.
Fine.
But then the other way of getting the object of desire, is to kind of put yourself through hell and kind of like really work at something and really kind of not enjoy something. But the weird thing about that is you might not actually get that thing that you enjoy.
Which I would say is probably more what Ken's about.
Right, okay.
Because to me, his desire, or from what we get from the end of this episode, when he sees Sal back in the office on Monday, is he's saying, oh, I want what you've got.
Yeah.
And we've seen his relentless pursuit of Jane and
true.
Other women.
Yeah, totally.
And
totally.
his fail, for whatever reason, we've never seen like why.
And that's why I called that pleasure, because pleasure is the kind of thing where it doesn't really have anything at the end of it.
But I don't think that is pleasure. I think he's possibly, I don't know, maybe I'm completely off, but is he actually trying to forge a relationship with a woman?
Yeah, totally. But what I mean by pleasure is, like, you could also say that
But he's putting himself through hell
Yeah,
in trying to get the thing that he wants.
Yeah, totally.
Because he's just getting rejected and doesn't seem to understand that he's bordering on harassment now.
Yeah, totally. But what I mean is, I mean, maybe I'm not totally right on what I'm saying, but for me, pleasure is, it's not necessarily good for you. You can, like chatting up a girl can be a pleasurable experience, but then she goes to her boyfriend and you're just left by yourself. So it's kind of, it didn't amount to anything, but it was fun in the moment. It just wasn't anything in itself. Enjoyment can be sort of like chatting up a girl and then it goes somewhere, or just talking to a girl.
But you can't define those things before they happen. Like, you can say, oh, I have a smoke when I go out because I like to smoke when I've had a drink, right? But then if someone asked you, can you recall every single cigarette you had, which you probably enjoyed at the time or found pleasure in? I can't remember. I mean, I've probably smoked far too many cigarettes in my life. But I don't remember. I can remember maybe 3 of them.
But I think so. Okay, so let's say, for instance, that this is another way of looking at pleasure and enjoyment. Let's say, for instance, that Ken really, from my point of view, Ken enjoys writing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that he enjoys writing. Just so you know.
Okay. I'm not saying this happens in the show. I'm just saying, like, this is like an example of how pleasure kind of affects enjoyment. So he wants to go and do some writing, but then this really hot girl turns up and she's kind of like, let's go and look at this picture, and he's like, oh, I just want to do my writing. I'm not saying this is what happened, but and so instead of doing the thing that he enjoys, he goes and does the thing that he thinks he'll get something out of, and that's pleasure. It takes you away from enjoyment.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I feel like the two things can. I feel like it's an icky.
It is. It's hard to. I actually find it easier to understand than the idea of desire versus want. I think they're very similar, but I find this easier. I find enjoyment versus pleasure easier to understand than desire versus want, because I still can't get my head around that fully.
Well, I mean,
or desire versus need. I don't know.
What, want and need?
Yeah.
Oh, see, I get want and need really, like...
okay.
So if we use want and need...
Yeah.
Ken wants... Ooh, it's tricky with him, actually, because I feel like he's very unclear in that he doesn't really have a need. That's the thing.
Right.
He doesn't
say what.
He doesn't say what he needs.
Yeah.
Perhaps the thing that he needs is gratification. Because I think, you wouldn't give someone something you'd written. As someone who has given people things, so I like to dabble in a bit of writing as well. And I handed something that I'd written to a friend of mine, and afterwards they gave it back to me and they said, "Oh, it's brilliant." You did. And I said, "Well, it's interesting you say that, because you were never going to turn up and say." That was a piece of shite. I'm never going to read your stuff again. And they said to me, "Oh, well, so what? You don't believe me? Then what's the point in me reading it?"
Yeah.
And then you sort of like, it's a really weird thing where it's kind of like, I still don't know if I believe anyone who's read my stuff and said it's good.
I feel like they nail that so well with the whole dinner scene with Sal and Ken, because the whole point of him being there really is just to get this validation that he's written this thing. He even says, like, I don't know if I want you to tell me that you enjoyed it or you didn't. Do you know what I mean? He's really sort of weird about that. And there's an end of one of the scenes where he basically, Ken says to Sal, "What did you think of it?" And Sal says, "It was lovely."
Yeah.
And that's it. It's like, there's nothing else to get from it. That's what I mean by, like, the object of desire. It's kind of like, it's pretty useless, really. It's just something to get you to that point. So in order to get the validation or whatever, he had to write this story. He had to give it to Sal. Then he had to go to Sal's house to. So they're living life within the confines of this idea he had to write a story. So there's this whole thing that kind of makes life, sort of thing.
Well, let's talk about Sal.
Yes. Poor Sal.
Is it poor Sal though? I mean,
Poor Kitty.
Poor Kitty for sure. But, you know, with Sal, I think as I say, he's clearly indulging in his fantasies that Ken is the object of desire, or whatever the hell you called it.
Yeah.
Isn't he? I mean, he's basically an idea to be flirted with. He's an object of art or whatever you called it.
He's almost literally the golden violin, in that he's this pretty thing that is pretty much useless. Pretty much useless to Sal.
But that's what I mean by him indulging his fantasies, though, because he... Sorry, I'm like trying to get comfy on this chair. It's like Fola's just moved house and he has new chairs. I feel a little bit like he's an indulgement. He's something that Sal knows nothing's ever gonna happen.
Are you saying he's a bit of pleasure?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's one of those where he invites him round. He's a guilty pleasure, is what it is.
He is a guilty pleasure, yeah, totally.
He invites him round, and he's sort of like, you know, he invites him into this flat that he's decorated, and like his, you know, the cooking that he's feeding him the sauce. It's like this is Sal's dream life with a man.
Yeah, it's totally. Yeah, it's totally. It's totally a fantasy, isn't it?
Everything is sort of like, and like I say, with poor Kitty, it is the whole thing. It's as though she's not there.
Yeah.
And he's totally focused on Ken.
Well, if we go back to the idea of this idea of the object of desire being essentially useless, right? If you think about Sal and think about how he got to that position with Kitty in the first place, I think he mentions his mother sort of moving up and like he brought Kitty with her. So that in itself, like one of the ways of looking at the object of desire is this idea of excess. So it's like there's this equation that Lacan came up with, which is desire equals demand minus need or something, right? And so the idea that Sal would desire a kind of a very normal existence, like normal in inverted commas, a heteronormal existence with a wife in a house and all that kind of stuff. So he desires that thing, he obtains that thing, but using Lacan's equation, desire is kind of almost like a disposable thing. It's kind of like something that you don't really want. It's just there. And that's kind of what Kitty is in this scene, where she's kind of just there. She's just almost like an addition to his life that he doesn't really want. And all the other stuff he actually wants, the new sort of desire that he wants is Ken. And yeah, it's just a bit sad, really.
It is sad. I think it's sad for all involved, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, to be a beard.
Oh gosh, I mean, and then it's interesting. I think the final thing to sort of say. I mean, we probably will touch on this again a little bit in the Jane part when we talk about the actual art. But it's the lighter is the symbol of it's like the first time you go on a date with a guy and they take you to the movies and you keep the movie ticket, although nowadays you don't do that, I don't think, but back in the day you did. And you keep those little mementos.
Yeah, it means something.
It means something, but it really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And that's what's really interesting is that, again, it's like that whole thing of like he's kept it. Yeah. It wasn't given to him. It wasn't a gift. It's something that he's kept as a memento of something that he experienced, and I think that's exactly what I've been talking about. Yeah, the object art is the experience, and that's what it is.
Object of desire is the lighter. But what I like about that last scene where he's got the lighter is he's got the lighter, which is essentially object art, so the object of desire, but he's smoking a cigarette, and the cigarette to me is pleasure. It's kind of it's the two things kind of together where like the
enjoyment and pleasure, kaboom!
Pleasure together, yeah. So I thought that was really cool. I love how the show does little weird things like that. Where
it's so crazy, Matthew. It's so crazy.
I love you, Matthew.
I like you. I'd probably like you more if I understood what you did a bit more. Anyway, let's move on to the final story arc, and then at the end we'll have our sort of random scenes to talk about. But stories...
that was a joke because I don't. I was just thinking like that's not, if someone took that seriously, that sounds really weird.
Took what seriously?
Me saying I love Matthew Weiner.
Oh my god! Seriously, no one's gonna tell him. Okay. Do you want me to send him? Do you want me to send him a Twitter DM?
It's not that. It's like obviously he's listening, and I just don't want him to feel a bit awkward.
Oh my god! Can you imagine if he was listening to this, like me just going, "Oh shit," and like penis jealousy and all that kind of stuff. Actually, Matt, my friend, can you clear up the whole penis envy thing, please? Thank you very much.
He's looking at his phone now, going, "They got it. They know exactly what."
Do you reckon?
Yeah, totally.
Do you reckon?
Yeah,
all right. So let's talk about my favourite story because it's got Joan in it. Jane upsets the natural order of Joan. The natural order of Joan being an actual thing, and proves that age before beauty, pearls before swine. Now, did you understand what I wrote there?
Yeah, so I was kind of surprised that you know, not just because you don't know.
Oh my god!
I'm not saying that you.
So offensive.
Because you kind of like you tend not to want to look that deep into it. So I kind of surprised that you kind of pulled that one out. The whole age change, because there's a lot of that in this episode. I think it's not just them two. There's loads of different. Even,
I actually haven't seen that, but yes, you're right.
Even with Sally, when Don tells that story about being a kid and how and Sally saying, "I'm glad I wasn't born in the olden days."
Yeah. And
how young people can sort of benefit from from the people that came before them, and sort of not really think about it and not have to deal with that stuff. And also, obviously, you've got the Schmitty and Kurt and Schmitty in that amazing scene where Kurt. So they go into I know we'll get to Joan in a second, but there's the scene where Kurt and Schmitty are in Don's office and they're talking about this document.
Yes.
And that document is kind of really important, and I wrote it down somewhere. That's it. It's called the Port Huron Statement.
Right.
Do you know what that is?
No.
So the Port Huron Statement was a kind of statement by lots of Ivy League students at university in America. And it's basically this very idealistic thing about how, you know, they're going to fight injustice and sort of rape. And it's kind of really interesting. It kind of feeds into this episode a lot because it's an object of desire, but it's not an actual object, it's a thought. And it's kind of like this idealistic sort of like setting out of how they're going to fight injustice and, you know, they're going to sort of fight racial inequality and sexual inequality and all these lots of other things as well. And the reason I find it really fascinating is because that's kind of what happens during the 60s. It all kind of plays out in a very kind of messy way, but like that was the starting point, and it's kind of like the starting point for it's almost like what's the term, incidental point, point of incident, I don't know, but you know, like in a film where you kind of like they set out what's going to happen in that film. That's kind of what that is in this episode. It's like this kind of, this is what's going to happen and this is how it's going to affect the characters in this story. And also through that entire scene, we've got them talking about making this speech about how they can kind of, you know, come up with things for they don't want to be told what to do and all this kind of stuff. And then just as they're going to play the song that they've written, this little jingle that they've written, the scene cuts, because it doesn't matter what the actual thing was. All that matters is you had an idea in the first place. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
So yeah, I just got. Sorry, I know I went way off.
So when I said we're going to talk about story C and then do our random scenes afterwards, apparently Fola didn't listen to any of that. So you can just enjoy that nugget that should have been at the end, and instead has ruined the format that I set up earlier. So let's go back to story C, which we were making the point before we kind of sidebarred quite significantly, that Jane upsets the natural order of Joan and proves that age before beauty, pearls before swine. And I asked you, what does that mean? And then you went on to talk about a completely different scene. So, yeah. All right.
Where do we start? Where do we start with this?
Well, I mean, I think let's talk about the incident of Jane luring the men into Cooper's office to look at this artwork.
Poor, unsuspecting men.
Because Jane is an interesting character. Because she's growing on me. I don't love her.
Right. Okay.
She is growing on me, and I do think that she's learned everything she knows from the Queen Joan.
From Joan.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if she had. I think they're very similar. I don't know because she's only been there
Yes, but she's 20, and you've just segued into that point about how they want to do things differently, their own way, and that's her doing things her own way.
That's very good
and
point.
she's taking control of the men who are constantly harassing her and sort of chatting her up.
Totally.
And she's almost like challenging them. Because she's like, let's break into... And they're all like, oh, we can't do that. And she's like, come on. It's not even breaking in. He's not even there. Like, let's just go kind of thing.
Yeah.
She's allowing herself to be young and wild and free and to just, like, look at... I mean, they're breaking in to look at a piece of artwork. Like, you know, I'm all for it, Jane. I'm all for it.
Before we... the only reason... So, I know I kind of went off on a tangent. And I'm going to go back to that tangent again. Just for one thing, because it goes into the scene that we're going to talk about. So, like, the end of that scene where it cuts off the music, right? And you're saying it's like the music is almost like it doesn't matter what it is. It's kind of it's almost like an excess. It's almost like a disposable part of the whole thing because it doesn't matter. All it is a point to get to, right? The next scene where they're all in that sort of room and they're all talking about this pitch for nappies.
Yeah.
Is a shot of a nappy and someone's pouring whiskey into it. Yeah, it's like almost like saying the thing that you wanted to see is shit and it doesn't matter. Never mind. Do you know where I'm coming from? No? Okay. Okay. Someone out there will understand what I'm saying. Anyway.
Okay. Jane and Joan.
But don't we want to go into it? So are we going to talk about how they end up doing?
Well, they end up doing it because Harry's got his little chat with Cooper coming up, hasn't he, and freaking out.
Oh yeah, okay. So should we talk about that, or should we just go?
Well, I've put in, if you'd read the format.
Okay, sorry.
We can talk about Harry at the end if we want to, but I'm not sure how long we've been going for already. So.
Okay. All right, let's talk about Jane.
Let's talk about Jane and Joan. Again.
Let's take another swing at it.
I actually think, really, I'd quite like to start sort of, because I think there's obviously a lot of let's chat up Jane in this episode. Let's harass Jane.
Yeah.
I like the bit where they actually go into the office and they all talk about what they see in the painting.
Yes.
Like, I think that is really, really fun.
Do you know what that reminded me of?
Is it a triangle?
No. It's not red in the face either.
Indian Summer?
No, not Indian Summer. It reminds me of 5G.
Ah. What happens in 5G?
In 5G, it's the one where we first learn about Ken's writing ability.
Okay.
And there's a scene where I think it's Paul. Who's it? It's Paul, Pete, and someone else, and I can't remember who. Oh, Paul, Pete, and I can't remember. Someone else, and they're all sitting in the room, and they all basically are all really jealous, and they all have a different take on why it's annoying that Ken wrote this story.
Right.
Only in this scene, they all have a different take on what the picture means to them.
And what it means to Cooper.
What it means to Cooper.
Well, I think they're all trying to figure out
Oh, yeah.
why, because this all started because he was like, they all think that Harry's going to be asked into Cooper's office to be asked what he thinks of this painting or something.
Yeah.
So it's such a weird thing to be stressed about, because so they've all gone in to try and look at this painting and figure out what the answer is. What is Cooper going to want them to say about this piece?
Well, I don't know if they're all thinking that. I think the only person who's really worried about saying the right thing is Harry. Harry was the other person. Harry's the only one who's genuinely sort of like, I need to know what to say about this painting, to the point where he's looking for a brochure for the thing. I think Sal is kind of very, almost like he knows all about it, but he doesn't actually connect with it in any emotional way. Jane is very...
My personal favourite.
Jane is very kind of logical about it.
That's interesting.
That's interesting, and just walks off. What's his name? Ken, sort of gets submerged in it, and he's like, this is amazing. It's
diving into a pool or whatever, isn't he?
Yeah, he does. He says it's like diving into a pool, or it's very deep. And that kind of reminded me of what Don said about what he wants in life. And he wants the ocean, but it's too big. And that kind of does a bit of a parallel.
Yeah, but I think that's a very interesting moment with Jane, in that she is what she is.
She does.
She is what she is. She's not after anything. She doesn't want anything from anyone.
Well, she's very logical about it, isn't she?
But I think she's quite a logical person anyway. I think she's clearly used to men hitting on her all the time, and and she's 20, for God's sake. So anyway, what happens next? Joan goes after Paul in a sort of weird coffee cup dance.
Yeah. I love that scene.
I love that scene as well. I thought it was brilliant, where she just appears and he's just like, oh no, oh no.
Well, I really like it because there's something before it. Yeah, so it's kind of a difficult, because I know we're going by character, but the run of scenes all kind of reflect each other up to that point. And the whole thing with Joan and Paul is, well, he doesn't tell her anything.
Yes,
right?
no, correct, he doesn't.
But she's kind of really. Why do you think he doesn't tell her anything?
Because he knows that she's like the boss, basically.
Mm.
She's the one that runs the show.
Okay.
She's the showrunner. She's the Matthew Weiner of Sterling Cooper. That's what she does, right? And it's like she wasn't consulted. She wasn't included.
Right. Okay. It's interesting, yeah.
And she wasn't part of it. And that's the thing, is that's why Paul knows, first of all, because it's almost like it's like, when you came onto the playground a bit late and all your friends were playing with someone else's, yo-yos or whatever it was,
yeah.
And they weren't interested in yours anymore, and you were like, hang on a minute. And the thing is, I think Joan's looking for that reason to be mad at the moment at Jane. She doesn't like Jane. She's threatened by Jane.
Yeah, totally.
She doesn't like that, and that's why. And the thing is, Paul will know that. They'll all know that, I think.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we talk about that scene then? Shall we get?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what that's all I really had to say about it. But if you have more to say, then go for it.
Well, hang on. So which scene are we talking about now?
Coffee cup.
The coffee. Oh, sorry. I thought we were going to talk about the next one.
Oh, no. What the confrontation?
Yeah, the confrontation. Hang on. Let me I want to make sure I don't have anything to say about this. It's interesting about the coffee cup in that scene, right?
Like the passing it back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit weird.
Because he buys so that's one of the things I wanted to say. So he buys this coffee, and she kind of takes it off him, and instead of fighting for it like an object of desire, he just goes and buys another coffee. And it's kind of like there's something about, and he tells her, like, you know, when Paul's asking, when Joan's asking all this information about what happened, he tells her it's none of her business, which is exactly what Cooper says to Harry when he asks him about the thing. But the difference between the two scenes, and I know I'm not supposed to be talking about this thing, but the difference between the two scenes is when Joan tells Paul, when she's trying to get information out of Paul, instead of asking him what actually happened, she basically tells him what happened, and he basically says, "I'm not going to tell you." Like it's almost like it's one of the things I have. One of my worries about this podcast is, like, I know on this podcast I'm just standing here telling everyone what's happening, and I don't know if that's the best way to do it. Like, the best way to do it is to say, what do you think happened, and have a conversation.
Well, that's what we are doing. People are just listening to us do it.
Well, we're doing it to each other, I guess, yeah. But we
Yeah.
don't do that for the audience. We're kind of...
Well, they can email us if they want to.
That's
They
true.
just haven't.
But I think that's how you sort of open up to people, isn't it? It's like what's interesting about the way Harry makes a really good call there is like by asking Cooper what he thought of the picture, because it literally opens him up and he starts talking about all kinds of stuff. But with Joan, she totally gets shut down because she's kind of assuming she knows everything and doesn't really give Paul a chance to kind of connect with her on any level. And there's lots of other things there as well about how they've kind of had a relationship and how they kind of know each other. But really, the fact that she doesn't give him a chance to just be a human being and just kind of relax with him, I think that's one of the reasons she doesn't get any information out of him.
So I think this episode for Joan is an interesting one, because I think this is the first one where we've really never seen her at a point where she is an object of desire, which is pretty much how we've seen her the entire way through thus far.
True, yeah.
Is that in this episode she's the only thing that is not desired
Yeah.
by a single other person.
I guess she is.
and that's, I think, what that's sort of her undoing, really, is that then makes her become ugly, because she's not, I don't want to say unwanted, but like, you know, in this episode, and it's really interesting, and we'll go into it in a bit, but it's really interesting that Roger never actually talks to her about what's happened and all this sort of stuff. And it's that whole thing of her feeling like going from being the object of desire to not being the object of desire anymore, and what that's like.
Totally.
And I think that's a really interesting thing, and you know, this is why she reacts the way that she does to this whole Jane thing.
Yeah.
Jane being all like, you know, they have the confrontation, and I really like how that's filmed, because that's filmed very much like Joan is the high angle, Jane is the low angle.
Yeah.
Jane is the innocent, vulnerable, you know, sweet receptionist who's put her foot wrong.
I know about sweet.
Joan is now this like horrible matriarchal figure almost, who's like, you know, trying to keep her natural order of how, you know, things are done. And you know, Jane's challenging that, and all the things, and you know, we know from Joan, although she looks fabulous, we know that Joan isn't a challenger, in that she doesn't challenge people to change. Her method is to work with the system that you have. She doesn't embrace Peggy's role, and she doesn't embrace Jane sticking up for herself, or, you know, etc., etc. And go on.
Shall we talk about that scene specifically, the confrontation?
Sure.
There's one thing I want to point out, or want to ask about before we get into it properly. But what did you think about what Jane said?
What, about being 20?
No, about they made me, I had no choice.
Well, I mean, she's using the charms that she uses on Roger on Joan, and it doesn't wash with Joan.
I don't know, because I initially saw that as like a blatant lie, right?
It is a blatant lie.
When you is it really though?
Yes, it is.
Well,
she's the one that's like, let's break into the office.
But from the perspective of, if you think about what Jane actually wants from these guys, right? And you can speculate, and we can kind of, you know, I'm not saying anything concrete here, but Jane really, what I think Jane wants is to be part of she wants to be in the in crowd. And there's only a couple of ways she's going to get into being one of the in crowd. Actually, the only way she's going to be in is by showing that she's kind of daring and that she's ready to kind of like do cool things and hang out with them. And there's no, like, she's not a dude, so people aren't going to come up to her and just accept her as one of the guys. She kind of has to be one of the guys. So she had to take that chance. So really, she didn't have a choice.
Bollocks. Bollocks.
Go on.
There's a difference between I didn't have a choice and they made me as well. I just want to say that it's a classic. It's a childish move. It's a mother's caught me. It wasn't my fault. They made me do it. Blah, blah, blah. Because the thing is, she knows. The reason she does that is she knows that Joan can't punish them.
Okay.
But Joan can punish her.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's about power, isn't it? And it is. I don't think Jane sees what's coming. I think she I think Jane wants to be and needs to be. It's not so much about being in the in crowd. I think it's just being popular and being I think she just holds there. I would say, possibly in a few episodes' time we might see her emerging as someone who wants to take over from Joan.
Okay.
For sure.
One of the a line that I love in that scene is actually Joan's response to that, and Joan says, "You're already bold."
Sorry, I just keep knocking it over with my foot.
Joan says, "Please, they'll do anything you say. You work for Mr. Draper." And to me, that's a really weird line. Shall I elaborate?
Of course.
Okay, and the fact that you don't think it's a weird line.
No, I don't think it's a weird line.
That's really interesting, because like to me, it's weird that she says, because like the fact that she says, "Please, they'll do anything you say. You work for Mr. Draper." I didn't expect her to say that. What I expected her to say is, "Please, they'll do anything you say. You're smoking hot." Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, the reason I think it's interesting, I guess it's interesting seeing it from your point of view as well, because I think that's what the scene's about, and it's like, and you've kind of alluded to it already, like the fact that these two sort of like, let's say, alpha female women, very similar women in the way that they affect men, right? They really they see the world in a similar way, is what I'm trying to say. So when Joan says that, like I said, like if it was me or if it was somebody else saying it, they'd see it from a very, I don't know, sexualized point of view, or just kind of like, attribute kind of Jane's power to her, the way she looks or whatever, right? But because it's Joan saying that, and Joan kind of has the same sort of worldview, the way Jane looks doesn't really factor into it. And it's like the two of them have a very similar look on the world, and really they should be friends, but for some reason they're not.
Okay.
And I think that what's happening in this scene, I think you're thinking this along the same lines as me, is that Joan's come into this kind of into this scene, and she's already been knocked back by Paul, and now she's come to Jane to say, what happened in that thing, and without batting an eyelid, Jane has basically locked her off and said, "I'm not telling you anything," and started lying from the get-go. And because of that, Joan then gets her back up, and before they've even had a chance to get on with each other, which is kind of what they want, they're at odds with each other. Did you get that?
I mean, like I said, I don't have a as what's the word? Descriptive. I think their relationship goes like this. She's a receptionist. Joan is her boss.
Right.
Now, if you look at the Joan-Peggy relationship,
Yep.
Peggy was going to Joan for advice. She looked up to her. She admired her.
Yeah.
Jane doesn't really respect Joan.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Joan knows that Jane doesn't respect Joan. Joan doesn't like that because Joan's whole thing is that she's respected in the office, right?
Right.
That's her whole thing. And that's how Joan's head works.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why what Jane does is so clever, because she says, oh, they'll do anything you say because you work for Mr. Draper.
Yeah.
Because everyone knows Mr. Draper is the head honcho. If he says shit, they'll shit, right?
Yeah.
But Joan's not afraid of Mr. Draper. However, Joan is a subordinate of Mr. Sterling.
Right. Okay.
So it is that whole thing of it's going above each other's heads.
Yeah.
It's that whole thing of cutting out. Because obviously Jane is unaware of the relationship between Joan and Sterling and Roger.
Yeah.
You know, so it is very much that they're game playing favourites, using the men in positions of power.
Yeah.
And I think it's, for me, it's just very interesting because Jane is fearful of Mr. Draper, I would say.
Right.
He is a figure in her mind to be feared because he's...
Yeah.
They haven't, but we haven't seen them get along particularly well.
Very true.
He has shown zero interest in her.
It's interesting at the end of that scene, because she gets fired, and the next scene is Don away with his wife. So she, even if she wanted to speak to Don, she couldn't. And there's so there's loads of stuff in this scene that's kind of this scene kind of like took up a lot of my time, because there's, so you know when I was talking about how the two of them should be getting along but aren't, there's a really interesting exchange between the two of them where Joan tells Jane to get her things, get her, her objects or whatever, and Jane says, "What?" Like as a question, like what? And it kind of comes after Jane says that she doesn't need a mother, and then Joan says, "What?" It's the same question, right? And it's like the two of them are trying to speak, but they can't hear each other, from a meta kind of point of view, and they're kind of like trying to talk to each other, but they can't hear each other, and that's ultimately where the problem is coming from. It's coming from the fact that, and afterwards they also say there's other things where, and I don't know if this makes sense, but it's like Jane says, who is it? Is it, yeah, Jane says to Joan, "What's wrong with you?" And it's like, to me, the two of them are kind of, like I said, they're these kind of alpha females in the office. They're kind of like perfect in every way. And I think the two of them are kind of asking each other, like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, kind of thing. And they're trying to kind of, the point of the scene is that these two can't get on, even though they really want to, and they should do, because they should be able to see each other as sort of allies in this whole thing, but they can't. And that's why it kind of, and then
they're not allies because they're different. They're not allies because one's in her 30s and one's in her 20s.
Totally,
that's why.
Yeah.
Because, and that's natural.
Yeah. I get that.
Unlike, and this is why the whole age before beauty, pearls before spine comes in, because unlike men, where age is more, you become more respected, like and the young ones are less respected, whereas with this, Jane is...
Okay, so no, I agree. I know. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but the reason I'm saying that is because, I was talking about how, I said that thing about how Lacan says women don't exist.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So,
right.
So that's a problematic statement. I get it, and I think he said that on purpose because he wanted to shock people. But the reason that came up when we were talking about master signifiers, right? And the idea of a master signifier is this thing that everybody looks towards to copy, to sort of be like, and then that's how it goes on. And you're right, that's a very male thing. The thing is, it doesn't really happen with women. Women kind of know themselves as a person, so there's no real sort of specific archetype of a woman that other women can aspire to, because they'll always aspire to what they want to be in their own mind. So that's what he means by there's no such thing as a woman. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It just kind of popped into my head.
But it's what I'm saying is the thing is, Joan sees it as age. Me cracking my voice, a little crack there. Joan sees it as age before beauty, but she wants to be both. She wants to be the young, hot, single woman. Now she's the older, engaged, still hot woman. But, you know, she's losing...
She's going through a rough time.
Yeah, you know, it was like what Roger says. That's really when he's like, oh, she's going through a lot, she's engaged or whatever. Like, I was like, that's amazing. I love that. But, you know, and then the pearls before swine thing is, I don't know if you know much about it, but that's a Victorian saying.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was it started because a young woman held open a door. I can't remember who they are, but you can look it up if you're really interested.
Okay.
But they were famous in some way.
All right.
When Victorians were famous.
Okay.
So a young woman holds open a door for an older woman and says age before beauty as a sign of respect. And the older woman turns back and says pearls before swine.
All right.
Because what young women are also presumed to be pearls, and swine, it was something to do with like crushing pearls. Like, I can't remember. Like, the swine crush the pearls, but there's like a whole thing about how age and beauty are wrapped together as in terms of an objective desire. Obviously, youth and beauty is the ideal.
Yeah, totally.
And as you lose one, you automatically it's assumed that you lose the other because you're losing.
Right.
And the thing is, as Joan is aging, and she's now seeing the next generation come in, and it's like normal to be threatened. And the thing is, what's interesting is Jane is probably the first employee that she's had that isn't threatened by her. So far, we've seen her make women cry, we've seen her send them all over the shop, we've seen her be really rude to Peggy. Like, do you know what I mean? And Jane is the first woman that's come in, like what those coffee people were saying, with ideas of her own.
And just doing her own thing.
And just doing her own thing. And she's also recognised that Joan does her own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And why can't she?
Yeah, totally.
And so I think it is a really interesting dynamic. But then Jane fucking proper little sneaky BOTCH as she goes crying to Roger.
So can I just say, so when she does that, you know, we're talking about pleasure and how it kind of gets in the way of enjoyment. It doesn't really work with this, I guess, because she's not necessarily enjoying leaving the office, but it does. It is a detour for her. You literally see her walk down the hall and take a detour into
because she's a sneaky bitch
into Roger's office. But yeah, I like that, how that works. What did you think about the office scene?
With Roger?
Yeah.
He's awful, isn't he? Oh, bloody hell. Well, I mean, she goes in, she's all like, I just want to say goodbye. Like, and she's really secretly sick of... But this is the point where you use the thing that, as an object of desire, you can choose to accept the adoration, or you can not want it.
Well, earlier in the show, Roger was talking to her at the desk, and he's kind of like chatting her up, and she says to him, "You could just find out where I live."
Yeah.
By just, literally just going and looking at my file, and he goes, "No, I don't want to do that," because again, I think that's the object of it all. He wants the journey.
No, the chase. Yeah, it's a huge part. Any man will tell you that. Love a chase. But yeah, it's that whole. But for him, it's obviously a power thing as well. Like, he comes in, she's playing the vulnerable, a bit like how the role that she tried to play with Joan. She comes in, she's the vulnerable, and at first he's like, oh well, if Dom fired you, he's a tough boss, blah blah blah. Yeah. And then she's like, actually, it was Joan, and he's like, wow. She's going through a hard time, blah blah blah. It'll be fine. Don't worry. Come in on Monday. I'll talk to her. Blah 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 blah. Plan works, brilliant, successful. And she gives him a little bit of a flirt. She gives him the little coy, turn back and watery smile, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does. Did you notice that when she left, she gave back the handkerchief?
No, I didn't.
It's like she kind of like she says she cries and sort of like dries her eyes. Then she gives him back the handkerchief and he looks at the handkerchief and keeps it. Very much like what's his name with the lighter.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's a bit weird when it's like bodily fluids. Okay, fine. I mean, I'm assuming he's going to wash it, but he might not.
Yeah. Did you get the sadomasochism in there as well?
No, I missed that.
When Roger said she needs to be reprimanded. Jane needs to be reprimanded. She's not gonna.
I mean, it's light.
It is light, but it's definitely there.
That might just be you and your dirty mind. All right, listen, I'm gonna have to wrap this up fairly soon, mate. Let's see where we're up to. So the final showdown between Joan and Jane we haven't discussed, which is when Jane is like literally looking, she sits down at a desk sneakily on the Monday morning and she's like, have I been spotted? I've been spotted. And of course, Joan, did you see her scan the office? Like, I love that. That was such a good, like, she were like, where's Joan? Joan's going to be there. And then as soon as she spots her, she's doing a sachet over and God, it's going down.
Before that happens though, we see Ken and Jane walk into the office. And Ken's sort of trying to chat up Jane, and he says, "I've got tickets to the Mets."
Oh yeah, I've got rubbish tickets, isn't it?
Rubbish tickets to the Mets. Yeah. The weird thing about that, to add to the fact that they're the rubbish tickets to the Mets, apparently during that year, the Mets kind of like went on one of the worst winning streaks of all time. They were the ultimate losers, apparently.
Oh no!
And I think that kind of reflects on the two characters. So I think the idea is that Ken and Jane are supposed to be these objects of desire in the office, right? They're supposed to be the young, pretty things that everybody wants to get hold of.
Yeah, you'd think they'd make a pretty good couple, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would. But then the true fact of the matter is, Ken is alone and has nobody and wants to be in a relationship but isn't. And obviously you've got Jane who's sitting there who's like terrified for her job now. I like the way the scene ends as well, because like obviously Jane's sort of still looking around and still terrified, and to me it's like it's more on this kind of enjoyment sort of thing. She's not going to enjoy her job now because she's always going to be looking over her shoulder because of Joan, and yeah, she's really fucked up that situation. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, has to be said. You shouldn't mess with the Joan.
Shall we talk about the picture?
Right, I think, so that concludes the storylines. But yeah, I think possibly the most important scene.
I love this scene.
I loved it as well, actually. I did. I thought it was great. And I think it really sums up the episode quite nicely.
It's so good because you've got... Okay, so the reason I want to talk about it really is because I don't know if I want to talk about it in terms of the actual episode. But just in terms of... Well, first of all, do you know that... There's two things, actually. Do you know that Rothko that's in the office isn't a real Rothko and doesn't exist?
I mean, no, I didn't research into it that much.
The reason I mention that is because one of the reasons this whole thing between Sal and Ken kicks off is because Ken mentions a line from... what's that play? West Side Story, yeah. Ken mentions the line from West Side Story, and when he says it, Sal looks at him and he's kind of like, oh. But what's really funny is that line is not in West Side Story, and it's not there at all. There's loads of things in this episode where characters get an idea that's not necessarily 100% correct, but even though it's not 100% correct, it still spurs them in a direction to do something. It's still
so basically what we're doing right now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, totally. That's what I'm saying. So like, and that's the reason why I bring it up in terms of this picture, despite the fact that it doesn't exist. It's the fact that, you know, the way Ken's looking at it, it's like you can't have a right understanding of it. There's no right answer. It's just, it's the whole point of it is it's supposed to make you feel, and by making you feel, it motivates you to do something with your life.
Yeah. And
that's kind of the whole point of the whole show, basically, is it kind of, you know, you can sit here and talk about it for, let's just see, how long have we been here?
I'm going to say an hour and a half.
An hour and 45 minutes.
Oh.
You can sit here and talk about it for an hour and 45 minutes, and it can kind of, and then you've got like a whole, you know, series of podcasts that kind of give you a talk. Just, you know, the podcasts are there and they kind of exist, but what the real cool part is like sitting here and talking about it and sort of like, you know, discussing it. Well, I think it is. Anyway.
Wouldn't it be great if, you know, on his deathbed or whatever, our mate Matt Weiner, it was like, didn't mean anything, just did it for the money. Can you imagine? Like, bloody love that.
I did all that stuff that they pulled out of him. What the fuck?
I know, but sometimes you wonder though, right?
Yeah, totally. I always think that. But that's the thing. I think, because what we're talking about is like validation, and like I don't think you'll ever, because I think Matthew Weiner and David Chase with Sopranos, they're really, really, really kind of not ultra secretive, but they never kind of confirm anything that anybody thinks about the show. They'll tell you what they think about the show, but they'll never confirm, oh yeah, that's what we were aiming for, or anything like that. Because I think the whole point and what makes this show work, what makes both shows work, is there is no validation on any of it. Like Sopranos.
But that's the same with all art, though. I mean, that's just art as a thing. Like the whole reason people go to galleries to see paintings is to discuss them, and what looks like a splodge on a white canvas to one person, can, like a pool to another, can look like, you know, simplicity. And they you know, they come up with, you know, neoclassicism and Renaissance and all these terms to go with them that describe a certain thing, but really it could be, maybe Suzanne just liked to paint flowers. Yeah. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, I think it's like anything. It's it's all talking points, and that's exactly what this show is. The same way that's what a piece of artwork in a gallery is. Yeah. And really, it's irrelevant how masterful or how simple,
or even what
something is,
what the right answer is, or it doesn't matter. It's one of the things I worry about when we talk about a show, is like when I spend so much time on it, because I know I'm not watching it the way it's intended. The way it's intended is you're supposed to just sit there, soak it in, enjoy it, and talk about it.
No. Like I say, it's like anything really. It's like, you know, the ending of Lost or whatever. Like people are going to have an opinion, and it's like, I mean, we were talking about a video game before we started talking about this. It's like your interpretation of it was totally different from my interpretation of it. Yeah. And it's kind of like, you know, I think that's the great thing about this, and one of the reasons why it works. And you can just watch it, probably what I do more of than you, but it's just watch it as something to watch, and, you know, I mull over a few points, but I probably wouldn't think about it this deep if it wasn't for this podcast. I would probably just watch it and like go and finish my washing or whatever. But.
Yeah. Like you're supposed to. Anyway, there's one more thing that we didn't talk about.
We didn't talk about Cooper.
We didn't talk about Cooper, did we?
And then that I thought that's the scene we were going to talk about before. It's probably one of my favourite scenes, because
alright, let's talk about
what I like, and we will talk about it, we will have to be fairly fast though. Okay. But I love this scene because Cooper remains and has always been a bit of a mystery. And I really like his character because he is, even that bit when he was having the conversation with Dom, and he was like, I think, would you say I know you little enough?
Yeah.
Or something to say, blah, blah,
you know,
blah.
I know a bit about you, Dom.
Yeah. And Dom's like, a little, and it's like, that's all he needs. And with Cooper, that's pretty much him as well. I mean, you kind of, what I was trying to think, what do I know about him? I know he likes Japanese shit. I know he likes Ayn Rand.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know he doesn't like people wearing his shoes in his office, to the point where even when he's not there, they still take off their shoes to go in. So he commands a lot of respect. We don't know much about, I mean, I don't know, you know, I don't think we've seen his wife, if he has a wife.
Nope, we haven't seen his wife.
Don't know if he has any kids. Not sure.
I don't know.
But you know, these are all things. So it's really interesting when Harry goes in for his meeting and he's like so sure it's gonna be at this painting and it's not. He just wants to go through his like little report or whatever, and then Harry says
doesn't
to him,
even like, when he goes into the office, he doesn't even look at him. He's got his head down. Yeah.
So he's looking at the painting and he's like, "Oh, you need to focus on this." Because he's like, "Oh, I'm hypnotized by the painting or whatever," and then he's like, "What do you think of the painting?" to Cooper.
Yeah. I love that because, like I said, that's such a smart thing to do.
But I don't think he wants to know because he genuinely cares what he thinks about the painting.
No, he just wants to have a conversation about it.
No, I think it's that he just wants to get that out of the way because he thinks that's an important thing to Cooper. He thinks he's bought this impressive work of art for like $10,000 or however much it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's like, what is it about this thing? It's like this painting is the object of desire, but no one knows why.
Yeah.
It's because it's not age, it's not beauty, it's not any of those things. Like, what makes this so important?
And to Cooper, it's just the fact it's going to make twice as...
And that's what's interesting, because when you think of someone who buys art, you generally think of someone who buys art because they want to put it on their wall and display it and enjoy it.
But I think the way he says that as well, the way he says it's going to double its value, he says it with a smile on his face.
Yeah.
He enjoys doing it.
Exactly.
It's an enjoyable thing.
But that's the thing, is the pleasure isn't about, or the enjoyment, whatever you want to call it, isn't about the art, it's about the price.
Exactly. For him, it's totally about the price.
And that's what's interesting, because everyone's trying to work out, it's like, you know, everyone's trying to work out what it is about this visual thing that they can see.
Yeah.
But actually it's about the thing that you can't see,
Exactly.
which is what it's worth.
Yeah. Totally.
So there we go. That's my take. I mean, I just really enjoyed that scene. I really liked seeing Cooper in action.
There's one other thing I just want to say. There's a really clever part of that scene is because they're talking about Harry. Well, Harry's talking about, he's trying to talk about the picture, and Cooper tells him, "You're here because of numbers. Stick to that. Don't concern yourself with aesthetics. You'll get a headache." And that, to me, again, it's ties straight into this whole thing of pleasure and enjoyment. And I don't know, you could take that first part of the thing about numbers, you could take that as like Harry being, you know, a middle class white man and he's just there because of the numbers, and Cooper tells him to stick to that. But the second part, don't concern yourself with aesthetics, is kind of like, don't concern yourself with, like, you know, aesthetics are a pleasurable aesthetic, something that's kind of pretty to look at. Don't concern yourself with pleasure, because you'll get a headache. And I took the headache thing as being like a hangover or a sort of, do you know what I mean? Something like some sort of pleasurable thing that just kind of makes you feel bad in the morning. So I just like that. I just thought it was really clever. There's loads of stuff that we could. I wish I was better at writing stuff and writing notes so I could be a bit more concise and talk about things in a much more concise way. But because I miss out so much stuff, I never get to write it down.
Well, you know, we'll let you know when Fola's bringing out his 12.
I'd love to do one.
It'll be a trilogy, won't it? At least a trilogy about Mad Men.
Shall we do one more question?
What, one more? Do you mean one more scene?
One more question that you asked.
Oh yeah, where the fuck is Pete? Seriously, missing Pete. Like, I've gone from like the biggest Pete hater to like, I love him, I miss him. Where is he? Bring him back.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be back next.
I hope so, because we saw a little bit of Peg. We saw a little bit of Peggy. Yeah. She was there in the background, but he wasn't even in the background. You know, and you're like, where's he gone? Has he gone on holiday? Like.
I like the fact that Peggy was only there to be kind of the insider when it comes to Don out of all those people, because they all ask her about Don and how he feels about these things, and yeah, that's cool. We didn't talk about the meeting. We didn't talk about the picture.
We didn't talk about that, and I think we've touched upon. I mean, there's a thing in there about age for sure, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's like a massive thing, but you know, we did touch upon what the guys were saying with their concepts.
Yeah.
And how that translates.
The only thing I'll say about that meeting, that they have the pitch meeting, that I found really funny and really kind of subversive, is the whole way through it, they're talking about, you know, how kids want to do the right thing and how kids are kind of, I think the whole point of the scene is basically those kids are saying, we don't want to be like you because you're old and you've built yourself up on this whole kind of on the backs of other people, and we're not like you. We think about other people, we think about race harmony and all this kind of stuff, and then they appropriate a song from the islands.
know. Oh my god. I thought that was really weird actually. When I listened to it, I was like, that's what they came up with. That's really odd. Like, why would you say all that stuff? I thought they were going to do because obviously Sal says the thing about no art or whatever.
Yeah.
But I thought they were going to do something with a blank page or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Just something really quirky. But no, some weird song about some girl in Mexico or whatever it was.
They just rip off another culture song type of music. Yeah.
Terrible.
Horrible. Yeah, anyway.
Awful.
That's middle class kids for you. Right, so anyway, you're supposed to do this part, not me.
Alright. Well, there's only one thing left to say.
Don't forget, everyone, Sopranos is even better. Someone tweeted that to me the other day and I was like so happy.
I know, and do you know what? I was just thinking, Matthew Weiner probably doesn't listen to us because you say that.
No, but he worked on Sopranos.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Matthew. Alright, that's it then. See you next week, folks.
Bye, everyone.